matriarch, he instructed the two juniors to pass their days peacefully. She would have continued, but upon noticing her daughter-in-law's unhealthy pallor, she chose not to keep them any longer and began to prelude their dismissal. However, as Changdi was about to leave, matriarch he stopped him. Sanlang, send your wife back first and come to grandmother's place later. Grandmother has something to say to you in private. Changdi froze for the barest of moments before he nodded in agreement. When Chu Lian finished paying her respects to the elders, Changdi grabbed her by the wrist and pulled her out. Erlong's white teeth were blinding against his tan complexion. Heh. Third brother is usually so cold. Who would have thought that he's actually the type to pamper his wife? We finally have proof that he's one of us after all. At that, Dallin rolled his eyes and shot him an ugly look. Fine. No one at home ever appreciates his company. Erlong was about to stand and make his escape, when Dallin grabbed him by the ear and dragged him off to the study to talk. Paiwen, go back and take a rest. So much exertion isn't good for your body. Once Changdi and his wife had left, matriarch he turned and addressed her daughter-in-law. Madame Liu's body was indeed extremely weak. She had forced herself out of bed for the sake of her son and daughter-in-law's tea ceremony. After only sitting for an hour or so, she was on the verge of collapse. Mother, please help this daughter-in-law take care of Sanlang. Daughter-in-law will take her leave now. Madame Liu's voice was light and feeble. Matriarch he waved her hand and ordered senior servant Liu to escort Madame Liu back to her courtyard. They left together accompanied by two maidservants. Only Madame Zhu and matriarch his two daughters were left in Kingxi Hall. Once Madame Zhu saw that there was nothing left to do, she rose and paid her respects to matriarchy, intending to move to the outer court to manage the estate for the day. Matriarch he was no longer in charge of maintaining the house of Count Jingen. That had originally been Countess Jingen's role, but then she had fallen ill. For a period of time after, matriarch he had once again temporarily taken up the mantle, but she had quickly passed it on when her granddaughter-in-law had entered the household. Thus, it was now Madame Zhu's turn to oversee the estate. All matters, internal or external, were all handled by Madame Zhu. After leaving Kingxi Hall, Changdi reverted to his ice-cold expression. He tossed Chu Lian's arm away and walked back to their courtyard in the He estate. One step ahead of her, Xian frowned as she watched young master straight back. She quietly called out to Sixth Miss, but Chu Lian shook her head with a bitter smile. She reassured Xian with a silent look before turning towards the courtyard. Who knew what was wrong with this Sanlang? After returning to their own courtyard, Changdi simply sat in the outer chamber, drinking a cup of tea before returning to Kingxi Hall. Chu Lian sat in the inner chamber, watching Xian and Fuyan as they put away the dowry that she had brought over from the Duke of Ying's household. Upon hearing the movements from outside, she realized he had gone out. He had probably made this trip back with her just for the old matriarch to see. Chu Lian unconsciously frowned. What was going on? This Changdi was completely different from the male lead in the novel. Had something gone wrong somewhere? But other than Changdi, everything else was exactly the same. She couldn't make any sense of it, so she simply chose to stop thinking about it. The female lead in the novel had 4 personal maidservants, all with the word Yan in their names. Each of them was a beautiful woman with their own unique special abilities. However, only Xian and Fuyan had grown up with the female lead. Jingyan and Minjian had been awarded by Duchess Ying when she had married out of the estate. Chu Lian knew everything about the personalities and minds of these 4 maidservants, as well as their endings. The looks that Fuyan had tossed Changdi from time to time hadn't escaped her eyes. Xian also tossed glances, but these were towards her mistress as she was putting away the dowry boxes. Xian had been quiet so far, but she did have a few words she wanted to tell Sixth Miss. However, with the other maidservants by her side, it wasn't a good time to speak up. Sixth Miss, she realized, had rushed to the old matriarch's courtyard early that morning for the tea ceremony. She hadn't eaten much either. Intent on rectifying this, Xian asked, "Third young madam, Are you hungry? Could you let this servant bring some refreshments over? Chu Lian nodded absent-mindedly. Xian brought back an exquisite box very quickly. The senior servants in charge of the main kitchen had been very courteous. Upon hearing that it was third young madam who wanted some pastries, they had brought out a fresh batch for Xian to bring back. Xian took out plate after plate of sweets from the box. To cheer sixth miss up, she even specially teased her and exaggerated her remarks. Third young madam, look at these pastries. We didn't see anything like this back at the Ying estate. These look so beautiful, why don't you try one? Chu Lian looked down and abruptly felt like pouting. For a modern foodie like her, who had eaten everything on both sides of the Yangtze River, these square-shaped pumpkin pastries didn't attract her at all. They had just scattered a few peach blossom petals on top. Did they really think these pastries were beautiful? Did Xian have any sense of aesthetics at all? The smell of vegetable oil wafted up from the pumpkin pastries, bombarding her nose with the choke-worthy stench of grease. Chu Lian couldn't help but wonder if the senior servants in charge of the kitchen had been ordered by someone to make life difficult for her. She tried to recall her memories, but it didn't seem like there had been an event like this in the novel. Xian's expectant gaze was too much for her to bear, so Chu Lian picked up a piece of pumpkin pastry and tasted it. She couldn't taste any pumpkin at all. Instead, it was like eating a spoonful of sugar, saturating her tongue until all she wanted to do was down a cup of tea and forget it had ever gone into her mouth in the first place. Chu Lian forced herself to finish one piece, but that was it. She had completely lost the will to pick up another. The house of Count Jingen was an aristocratic family at the very least. Did they really eat these kinds of pastries at home? Chu Lian was starting to feel sick from the obnoxious sweetness, so she didn't even look at the tea that Fuyan had just poured and simply drank it in one gulp. However, the second the tea hit her tongue, Chu Lian's eyes widened and she spat it all out, completely discarding her image. Her personal maidservants were horrified. They thought that something had happened to Chu Lian. Third young madam, what happened? Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere? Xian, who was her usual server and had never seen anything like this happen before, was about to burst into tears. Chu Lian placed the teacup back on the table. She even spat a few times before finally getting the weird taste of a mix of spring onions, ginger, garlic and other herbs off her tongue. Bring me some plain water, quick. When Xian heard Chu Lian's orders, she hurriedly poured a cup of warm water and passed it over. Chu Lian had learned her lesson. She stared carefully into the celadon teacup in front of her to make sure that it was really just clear warm water, before drinking it down without any qualms. After washing away that weird taste in her mouth, she finally let out a comfortable sigh. What did you pour into that teacup? Once she had recovered her breath, Chu Lian felt a sense of urgency. Why were there spring onions, ginger, garlic, cinnamon powder, and all other kinds of seasonings in there? It's sencha, third young madam, isn't it your favorite? Xian blinked, her eyes slightly red. She passed the handkerchief in her hands to Chu Lian to wipe her mouth with. Sencha. That's right. She finally remembered. In ancient China, when tea culture had just started to become popular, it was sencha that was in vogue. However, she couldn't have imagined that it was sencha that was popular in the fictional Great Wu Dynasty. The sencha of this era was completely different from the sencha of the modern era. Perhaps it was because sencha had just come in fashion recently here, so there weren't any special rules to it. They just put all sorts of seasonings into the tea to boil. Once it was done, they would use a special tool to whip up froth in the tea. Some highly skilled connoisseurs would even add drawings on top of the froth, similar to the latte art drawn on cappuccinos in modern cafes. However, this strange taste couldn't be compared to coffee at all. She had been a little nervous during the tea ceremony this morning, so Chu Lian hadn't even noticed what the tea was like. Chu Lian waved Xian and Fuyan away. As an excuse, she could only say, "My appetite hasn't been faring well these 2 days, so I want to eat something light. Don't serve this sencha in the future. Plain water is fine." Upon hearing this, Xian was like an anxious little bird. Third young madam, how can that be? Brewing sencha is your specialty. You have to show off your skills in the future. You can't stop drinking sencha. That's right. sencha was growing in popularity by the day in the Great Wu Dynasty. Many young ladies in aristocratic families would specially learn how to brew it. The more flavorful the sencha and the more beautiful the posture of the brewer, the more they would be praised as elegant and noble ladies. Once Xian had spoken, Chu Lian recalled how the novel had mentioned that the female lead had been quite good at brewing sencha. When Duke Ying had invited guests over, he had specially summoned her to brew some for them. Right now, it wasn't that easy to be a noble lady in the Great Wu Dynasty. They had to have some skills that could wow an audience. Sixth Miss Chu wasn't favored in the Ying household. Her other skills were average compared to the other ladies in the estate. Brewing sencha was the only skill she could boast of. No wonder Xian had been so anxious upon hearing that Chu Lian was going to stop drinking it. Unfortunately, the current Chu Lian was no longer the same as before. Even if she drank sencha by the bucket loads, she didn't know how to brew it. Furthermore, in her honest opinion, the sencha of this era tasted terrible. Even if she knew how to brew it like they did, she would feel bad for making anyone drink it. The nonsensical mixture of seasonings could easily kill someone someday. And when that happened, Chu Lian did not want to be that someone, or the cause of that someone's death. Alright, I only said that I wouldn't drink it from now on. I didn't say that I would stop brewing. Chu Lian could only gloss over the matter like this. She wasn't the original female lead. Although she was the mistress of these maidservants, she couldn't change her behavior too much all of a sudden. The maidservants fell for her false reassurances and let out sighs of relief. Chu Lian held her forehead in her hands. Fuyan's eyes darted around before her gaze landed on that golden, drool-worthy pastry on the table. She gulped in secret. It really was like how Xian had said. They had never eaten such beautiful pastries back at the Ying estate. Third young madam, what do you think of these pastries? Chu Lian had suffered too much of a shock from the sencha, to the point that she had almost forgotten about the pastries that had made her drink it in the first place. She shook her head in disappointment. The taste is average. It's too sweet and greasy. Take one for yourselves and try it. Chu Lian simply wanted to test the taste buds of the people from this era. Xian and Fuyan had been serving the female lead for a long time. They probably knew the tastes of the female lead the best. Letting them try the pastries was the best way to find out what she was supposed to like. When the four personal maidservants heard her words, their eyes lit up. Minjian and Jingyan had been sent by Duchess Ying as part of her dowry, right before her wedding. Before that they were only second-tier maidservants in the estate, and they hadn't led very good lives. Minjian and Jingyan were second-tier maidservants. How could they have ever had the chance to taste such fine cuisine before? These delicacies were reserved solely for the nobility. The four personal maidservants each took a single pastry and carefully placed it in their mouths. They looked like they couldn't bear to eat it all at once. So instead, they took small, careful bites to savor the pastry like it was some priceless treasure. Minjian and Jingyan even displayed blissful expressions without any restraint. Chu Lian watched them curiously. If she hadn't tasted that pumpkin pastry just now, she would have suspected that there was something wrong with her taste buds. How is it? Chu Lian asked quietly. She didn't want to disturb their enjoyment of the food. Minjian continuously nodded while she licked the sugar left behind on her fingers. Third young madam, it's delicious. After saying so, her eyes drifted towards the two pastries left on the dish. She clearly had something else she wanted to say. Chu Lian, after listening to all their replies and confirming that the pumpkin pastry was indeed delicious to them, Chu Lian began to despair. Surely not. A pumpkin pastry sweet enough to kill someone was delicious to them? These four maidservants had come from the house of Duke Ying, even if their meals weren't as fine as that of the young masters and ladies. It was still comparable to the meals of a rich commoner's family. If these were the maidservants' tastes, and the maidservants' tastes were the standards of the rich, here in the Great Wu Dynasty, could it be that this was the level of fine dining here? Wasn't that too poor? When Xian saw that her mistress' expression had collapsed, her brows drew together. She thought that Chu Lian was unhappy, so she hurriedly said, "Third young madam, do you think that we caused you to lose face?" A simple plate of sweets from a noble family's household had been all that it took to reduce them to such a state. As she recalled their loosened expressions from just moments prior, Xian felt that she had done something bad. Chu Lian shook her head. This Xian was good at everything and put her whole heart into her work. However, she had the habit of overthinking things. How could that be? It's just a plate of pastries. Don't tell me that your mistress is such a stingy person in your hearts. They shook their heads, afraid that Chu Lian would misunderstand. Then there's nothing wrong. Why do you have such troubled expressions? If you like to eat them, then take these pastries and split it between all of you, Chu Lian said as she smiled. Jingyan's eyes widened. She had a pair of canines peeking out, so she looked especially cute as she smiled and said, "Third young madam, if you give them all to us, then what are you going to eat?" Xian had specially gone to the kitchen to bring back these exquisite pastries for Chu Lian. Third young madam was one of their masters. They couldn't let her go hungry. Chu Lian rested her chin on her slender hand and replied with an equally carefree manner, "I don't like to eat these. They don't suit my tastes." "But third young madam, didn't you like eating these sort of sweets back at the Ying estate?" Xian asked, finding it strange. Chu Lian's expression froze stiff for a moment. Damn it, she had forgotten that Xian and Fuyan had been the female lead's personal maidservants, and as such, they knew everything there was to know about the female lead. It's not that I don't like to eat sweet stuff. These pastries just aren't that tasty. Chu Lian could only be honest with them. Fuyan inwardly snorted with laughter, but didn't show any of her disdain on her face. As the 6th Miss personal maidservant, Fuyan knew exactly how 6th Miss had passed her days at the Ying estate. It was considered a good day if the kitchen gave them a few pastries at all. When did they ever get the chance to be this picky? Now that she had married into a noble family and had become the third young madam, she immediately started being picky with her food. Who was she putting on airs for? Xian and the other 2 maidservants stared at Chu Lian in wide-eyed surprise. They couldn't quite believe what she had said. Goodness, their mistress must have turned silly once she had gotten married. She actually thought that the pastries of the house of Count Jingen weren't that tasty. Even the Empress wouldn't say something like that. The chef who made pastries in-house, Jingen, was famous throughout high society in the entire capital. On special occasions, the noble families who were on intimate terms with the house of Count Jingen were proud to receive gift boxes of assorted sweets from the Jingen household. Normally, the Jingen household wouldn't hand them out as gifts. If anyone wanted to have the chance to eat such delicacies, they would have to come to the Jingen estate as a guest. Of course, Chu Lian didn't know any of this. Although this was the fictional universe of the novel, there was a limit to what had been described. The novel couldn't possibly explain every single little detail. Thus, something like a famous sweets maker hadn't been mentioned at all. Third young madam, could you possibly be joking? Minjian softly asked. Chu Lian helplessly shook her head and stood up. She looked around the room, seeing that there were still some kumquats displayed on the table from the wedding. She walked over and picked one up, thoughts rolling about in her head. Xian, come here. Xian walked briskly to Chu Lian's side. Chu Lian waved the little kumquat in front of Xian. Do you see this kumquat? Xian didn't know what third young madam wanted, so she simply nodded. Take all of these and wash them. Then take some salt and scrub the skin for a while before rinsing it again. Use a small knife to make 4 cuts in each kumquat and take out all the seeds. Then place the kumquats in a sugar water bath to cook until they turn translucent. After that, take them out and pickle them in honey for 2 hours. As Chu Lian spoke, she pointed out where the cuts should be made and taught Xian how to remove the little seeds. The maidservants were flabbergasted. It was only when Chu Lian had finished her instructions that they recovered their senses. However, Xian didn't immediately take the kumquats out to make them into sweets. Instead, she knelt down, knees hitting the floor with a thump. Chu Lian was shocked. What happened? Why are you kneeling down? She had come from the modern world after all. She really couldn't get used to how the people in the great Wu dynasty liked to kneel down for the slightest cause. The other 3 maidservants looked at Xian with envy. Xian raised her head, the corners of her eyes slightly reddened already. Xian thanks third young madam for teaching this servant a secret recipe. Xian will keep it absolutely secret from now on. My lips are sealed. Chu Lian. Chu Lian didn't know what to say anymore. All she wanted was to eat some candied kumquats. She was too lazy to do it herself, so she had taught Xian how to make them. The recipe for these candied kumquats was so easy that anyone could do it after seeing it once. However, these maidservants were treating it like some secret recipe. She was a little embarrassed. Back in the modern era, you could simply search for recipes like this online, and there would be enough results to make a person's head spin. It was just a matter of whether you were too lazy to make them or not. There was something Chu Lian did not know. In the Great Wu Dynasty, eating rare delicacies served on an array of platters, while listening to a live musical performance was the height of extravagance. This was naturally a life reserved only for nobility. Cuisine was judged by quality and not quantity. Secret recipes were essential for large noble families, as they signified the ability to create those sumptuous foods, vital to their ostentatious lifestyle. The families of court officials had to have one or two secret recipes at hand. Noble wives on close terms with one another would exchange secret recipes as a sign of the highest intimacy between them. From this, it could be seen how important these secret recipes were to the people of the Great Wu Dynasty. It was precisely because of this emphasis that the noble families who received the iconic sweets of House Jinggan were so proud of their gifts. Even though these sweets had been sent to almost every noble family over the years, the house of Count Jinggan was still the sole producer due to keeping the recipe absolutely secret. The instructions that Chu Lian had so casually relayed had been taken for a secret recipe. Sixth Miss Chu's mother had passed away when she was young. The four maidservants had grown up in the Ying estate, and had thus more or less heard of her. The third madam of the house of Duke Ying. Third madam was second master's first wife. She had been born into a literary family. Unfortunately, Chu Lian's maternal grandparents had been implicated in General Chengping's rebellion, and their family's status had declined. Third madam had been pregnant with Chu Lian at the time. When she had heard of the fall of her family, she had suffered a shock, which had caused the pregnancy to become unstable. After that, she had a difficult labor. When Chu Lian was only a year old, third madam let go of her ties to this world. Although she had passed away, there were rumors that she had left some valuable treasures for sixth Miss Chu. Thus, the four maidservants weren't at all suspicious of how Chu Lian had recited a recipe for candied kumquats so easily. They assumed that it was a secret recipe that the third madam had left for Chu Lian. The well-known sweets maker of the Jinggan household had made the Jinggan estate incredibly famous with just a few types of sweets under their belt. Thus, it could be seen why the four maidservants treated the matter of Chu Lian teaching Xian a secret recipe so seriously. Of course, Chu Lian didn't know any of this. If she ever found out, she would probably burst out into laughter. She had accidentally transmigrated into this darn book without bringing anything from the modern world. Chu Lian might not have had any physical objects that could help her, but she had tons of these worthless secret recipes lying around in her brain. Chu Lian still couldn't understand why Xian was so grateful over a simple recipe for candied kumquats. She didn't want to think too much about it either. Since she had just come to this world, it wasn't too good if she was overly curious about things she should already know. She waved Xian away. All right, stop making a fuss over such a small matter. You should hurry and make some candied kumquats for me. Xian wiped away her tears with a handkerchief and sniffled. She replied happily, all right, third young madam, just sit here and wait. This servant will be back soon. Fuyan watched Xian's departing back with extreme jealousy. Her eyes flickered and she began to serve Chu Lian with eager attention. She hinted, third young madam, you treat Xian so well. You taught her a secret recipe just like that. Chu Lian raised an eyebrow as she sipped a cup of warm water. She turned to Fuyan and said, Fuyan, do you want to learn how to make sweets too? Fuyan's eyes lit up. but she hurriedly suppressed the greed in her heart and said, "This servant doesn't dare to overstep her bounds." Chu Lian didn't speak again, and noticed a glint of disappointment flashing through Fuyan's eyes. She didn't want to base her judgment of these few maidservants' characters off what she had read in the novel. Sometimes there was no boundary between being a good or bad person. Sometimes a bad person could become good by simply making the right choice. Thus, as much as she could help it, Chu Lian didn't want to judge them too quickly. She wanted to guide these few maidservants fairly before making a decision. Xian worked quickly. Before 11 a.m., the candied kumquats were done. These sweets were quite simple to make. Xian placed a snow-white porcelain bowl full of candied kumquats in front of Chu Lian. Blushing a little shyly, she spoke to Chu Lian, full of overflowing emotion. "Third young madam, please try it out. This is my first try, so I'm afraid I didn't make it well." The kumquats had originally been a golden color. After they had been cooked and soaked in honey, the kumquats were now an enticing shade of translucent orange. Due to the fur cuts made while extracting the seeds, they had flattened a little after cooking. The cuts also separated the kumquats into fur pieces. The candied kumquats stood out against the white porcelain, like a flower about to bloom. When it was served on the table, a sweet fragrance with tones of citrus and honey began to drift up.